We call him Mundurtha Modi.
Mundurtha Modi.
Even a text like the Kama Sutra is from the male gaze. That's why if I had to, like 30 years from now, write a book about what this would be called, it would be called The Age of Anxiety. Celebrity for me is basically what Shah Rukh Khan has. That is celebrity. Anything less than that is not celebrity.
His books have made history more enjoyable, especially for those of us who have not really known history except for NCERT books. He has called himself student of history, although the entire world knows him as a historian. Manu S, the writer, award-winning writer of Ivory Throne, Rebel Sultans, False Allies. Thank you for joining us here on SoSouth.
Pleasure. Good to be here finally.
It's good to be here. Now, my first question to you here would be, what made you turn from economics, foreign policy, chief of staff of Shashi Tharoor to history?
No, look, the history was always there. It was never the case that there was no history and then I was on some completely radically different path. I was always studying history. I was always interested in history. But like most kids tell me, even now, people don't think you can really have a career in history, right? People think, okay, you have it as a passion. You might be interested in history, but it's not something that you can earn a livelihood from. And to be honest, for most part, it's true. It's quite tough to make a living out of history unless you're teaching or you get a job and that kind of thing. In my case, from my teens, I was always interested in history. I was always reading history. It was my favorite type of book to read other than biographies. So back of the head, it was there. Even when I did my undergrad, then my master's, started working with Dr. Tharoor, I was already by then working on my first book, which was a book of history. At that time, I thought of, passion project. This is something I'm doing on the side. But ultimately, the book came out 6 years later. It proved to be a success. And it is true that success ultimately does give you a degree of confidence where you think that, okay, if I could pull this off, 6 years was tough. I could pull it off. People seem to have liked it. Maybe I can try one more. That's how the second book, Rebel Sultans, happened. Then the third book happened. Then the fourth book happened. And then later this year, I have a fifth book coming. So it'll be almost 10 years since I started publishing, 15, 16 years almost since I started writing. But I think each one gives you the momentum and the confidence to keep going. And that's what I'm trying to do as of now.
You mentioned your fifth book. Yes. Which is it? When is it? Who is publishing it?
The book is being published by Penguin here in the UK. It'll come out ideally, I think we're planning for late November, early December. The final date hasn't been fixed. What it is and what the title is, I will not reveal yet because frankly, we ourselves haven't finalized it yet.
Okay,
for me, the title comes in the last minute.
Okay, if not the title, at least what is it about?
I'll only say it's my most ambitious / controversial / complicated topic. And I have half a fear that after this book, I'll get cancelled. But that's okay. I have a plan, which is that if I do get cancelled and my writing and history career comes to an end, I'll just retire to my ancestral village in Kerala and become a farmer. It's possible.
You heard it here. His next book is coming, although he's being a little cagey about his...
Little is an understatement. I'm being very cagey. But...
You heard him say it on air, on camera, that he's being cagey about what the book is about. But which means let's hold our breaths. Another few months, we will know what it is about.
December by December, I should think.
So what was your aha moment? Like, this is what I'm going to do from here on.
I don't think there was an aha moment. Like, it wasn't like one fine morning I woke up and did it. Partly because I'm not that person. I don't take decisions by jumping into them. I'm very much a gradual, slowly prepare the space, set the ground, then start working on it, then see how it's going, take a pause, come back, keep building. If it's still going well, go on with the roof. That kind of a mindset. So I'm not somebody who jumps into things. I'm not somebody who gets swayed by sudden decisions or is likely to take sudden decisions. I like to sort of calmly sit back and think and all of that. In this case, as I said, that first book started taking shape while I had another career, while I had another job. So it was always happening in parallel. But at one point, I think around 2017, I finally hit a juncture where I was like, now I really need to decide because I'm 27. I've got another book. My second book was on the way by then. And I was like, what do I do? Do I stick to Delhi, Parliament, Dr. Tharoor, that entire space? Because I also enjoyed that. I got that job when I was 21. It was my first job out of my master's. And at the age of 21, I was running a parliamentarian's office. I was meeting diplomats, ministers, exposed to all kinds of interesting conversations, interesting ideas, organizations, I remember I even got to sit in a private plane and like travel to a fancy place in a private aircraft. So it was exciting in its own way. It was challenging in its own way. There'd be speeches in Parliament, and our entire team, we'd work on it all night. And then the next morning, Parliament, something would happen and the whole thing would be suspended, and we'd be like, we stayed up till 2, 3 working on the speech. But such is, like, it was therefore a very interesting space to be in. So it wasn't an easy decision for me to give that up and say, okay, I'm just going to go into this business of books. Especially also because books and history and research are fairly isolating jobs. I'm not a teacher, right? I'm not affiliated to a university. I don't teach, I don't lecture, any of those things. So for me to chain myself to a desk, and I'm not an introverted person or anything, I like to be around people. So chaining myself to a desk, isolating myself, focusing purely on individual projects that run years, that take up years at a time, that was challenging in its own way. I knew I could do it, but again, very different from what I was doing in my day job. So I reached that point around 2017, and as a way to partly test it out, I thought, okay, let me go do a PhD. Because if I'm going seriously into history, I do need a PhD in history. The academic credentials, the training, that kind of tick in the box, right? And a PhD is minimum 3 to 5 years. So that gave me the space where I could give up the job, also focus on history in an academic sense, eventually do my thesis. And that gave me finally the clarity that, okay, look, I think I've taken the right step. This is what I want to do. And although I haven't given up the other thing completely, I still have a toe in those things. I still do go for a bunch of conferences. I'm part of some networks that have these annual reunions and all of that, where the conversation is all international relations and foreign policy. So I keep that side alive in a small way, but not actively, and not something that I don't think I'll ever go back actively into that space.
So how was the life of running a parliamentarian's office?
Stressful, but in a good way. And again,
tell us about a day in.
So if Parliament was not in session, it wasn't that bad, because you could come to office by 9, 10 sometimes. That was okay, because the MP is not in town. Then he'll be in his constituency or he'll be traveling, Dr. Tharoor. So then I can come into the office slightly late. There aren't any pressing things happening. We'll get calls from the Trivandrum constituency office saying, these are the issues that are pending with such and such ministries. We need to follow up and get this done. So then I'll get on the phone with all these bureaucrats, slowly try to push these individual pending cases or whatever. There'd be some planning, organizing for later, all of that kind of stuff. When Parliament was in session, it was a lot more crazy. You have to be in the office by 8-ish, partly because people start trickling in by then. People want to come see the MP in the morning. He has to go to Parliament by 11. He has to be in there. There are speeches happening. There are private member bills being presented. There's debates taking place. There's research that needs to be done. When I started, it was me and a gentleman who used to handle clerical stuff. So it was just the two of us, and he was a retired bureaucrat. I was a 21-year-old. And non-Parliament times, I used to sit there in a t-shirt, very casually with jeans and t-shirt, and it was very, very, free that way, which was to Dr. Tharoor's credit. He was never fussy about these things. But slowly we had expanded the team. So there was a legislative team, there were interns, there were other people who had been delegated various jobs, and I had to sort of coordinate all of this and sort of supervise all of this. So then the legislative team would come up with questions and issues. So we would highlight issues, saying these are the issues the MP is interested in. We need to come up with what are public interest matters pending here. What are the questions we can raise in Parliament? Then that will be presented to him, and he'd decide, okay, these are the issues I want to highlight as an MP, and this is my position on this. Private member bills, as you know, I wasn't involved at that particular juncture, but he was one of the first people to take up our thing on section 377.
377.
Yeah.
In fact, he has, I think Shashi Tharoor, from what I remember, he's one of the few people who actually started the private member bills, introduction of private members.
It became fashionable after
he was a trendsetter.
Yeah. And he's introduced a number of very good bills.
In fact, we are actually looking at, he talked, especially in the wake of the Kolkata rape and murder. We are going back to the one that he presented. We actually dug up. He himself tweeted, and now we are actually looking at those speeches that he had made to present. In fact, it was his private members bill for doctors' protection, doctors and health workers' protection. So he's put up some interesting numbers out there. Yeah. We are like, while the entire this thing is happening, reactionary. There is somebody says something. It's like a war of words
it's a
out
thing,
there.
No, we can't have knee-jerk reactions to problems, right? We have to anticipate problems. We can't anticipate things happening 30 years into the future. But these are issues that happen all the time. Sexual violence is not new. rape is not new. These are issues that happen when women are in spaces where men have historically dominated, which means an infrastructure can be created, a culture can be created with some foresight that prevents these things or has mechanisms to professionally handle it if such tragedies do take place. Why is it that in the 21st century we don't have it? Because we haven't necessarily put in the thought. So in fact, that's what these were the conversations that would happen around Parliament time. Like, we would be really into the issues, and like there'd be debates within the team and things like that. So that would then take up some of the time. He would go off to Parliament. Evenings there'd be meetings taking place, or there'd be a book to release. He'd have a seminar, a conference, and I would often tag along for these things. And these meetings would finally go on till about 9 o'clock at night. So you're essentially working from 8 in the morning till about 9 at night. But again, as somebody in my 20s at that time, I never regretted it. I'm one of those old-fashioned people who believes that in your 20s, you can really slog it. And if you're willing to, then the rewards are just, and I'm not talking about monetary rewards, but the things you see, the kind of people you're capable of meeting if you're just willing to sort of push yourself a little bit. And that worked out well for me, at least. I don't know if it's a formula for everybody else, but for me, it certainly was an enriching experience. Just handling the stress, learning to handle the stress, learning to manage my time, learning to deal with people. Sometimes, there were meetings, right? And say a big diplomat's coming. Now there's another meeting already happening. We're running, say, 15 minutes late. Now, this is a big chap who's come. He's an ambassador with bodyguards and all of that. So it was my job to go and entertain this person for 15 minutes and keep them sort of happy and not
they're occupied, so that they don't worry that the person that they're supposed to meet, they're not there.
They don't get offended that they're being made to wait 15, 20 minutes or whatever. So even learning those little social tricks as it were.
So I'm sure that was how it went about. But then moving from that to going into somewhat of an isolation, because I'm sure when we talk about history is all tomes with those dusted things, and these are the pictures that come to the images that come to our head when we think of history. It's like all these old men sitting on top of it and poring over those with magnifying lenses and things like that. So going from that bustling life, that hectic life, to somewhere we are just literally isolated from people, where books are your only companions. What was the transition? What did the transition feel like?
Again, I won't be melodramatic about it or over-exaggerate it. The thing is, as human beings, we are very adaptable people. If we're just willing to adapt and bend and shift our shape according to context, it's perfectly possible. So one fine day, I'm in Delhi leading this very active kind of life. And I also used to have lots of friends there. I'd be out every evening, things like that. And then in London, 2017, at the start of my PhD, I've got a book coming out, things are happening. Very different. Suddenly, I'm at a desk, morning to evening, barely speak. In the library, you can't really talk, except maybe at lunch. And at lunch also, I avoided people because I just wanted to eat quickly and go back to my work. I always had this sense that I have very limited time. I have to get as much done in as little time as possible. Because, an education, this was in the UK also. The UK is expensive. I was putting in money. I later got a scholarship for a certain chunk of the fee, but I had to put in the rest of it myself. So I had a sense of value of time, really, and I had to really focus on that. So there was no time to sit and really think about, how am I going to adjust? I had no option. I had to adjust and just, move with it. Otherwise, things don't get done. If we sit and overplan too much or overthink too much, sometimes I think it can be counterproductive. So I just always have this habit of hitting the ground running. I've landed in this situation. Okay, just keep walking. There's no way you're not going to stop just because the situation is unfamiliar or not to your liking. That's been the attitude always. So in that sense, there was no trouble, but it was a shift. It was definitely a shift.
So 2018 is when Ivory Throne came out, right?
15.
15 is when Ivory
Almost 10 years.
Congratulations. It's still
next year it will be 10.
It's a seminal work in the sense that it kind of redefined the way history is looked at. Because we have historians like Ramla Thapar, Ramakoti. These people they're historians. They are in the field, but they're not really known beyond the field. You became a rock star, cool historian, which made history cool for us.
No, I think one of the things that I still get is, including this morning, there was a talk here in Bangalore, and again, someone came and said, I didn't realize you were this young. And I was like, I've got grays on my beard now, not that young anymore. 9 years ago, I was young, I'll admit. And at that time, I think it caused a bit of a sensation that there was a 700-page book and essentially a scrawny, skinny 25-year-old standing next to it and saying, look, I wrote this. That, I think, worked a little bit to my favor because it created a certain kind of curiosity. Secondly, I think the topic was just fascinating. Although I was obscure, the subject itself was broadly obscure. The story was still quite compelling, and I think people connected to that story. They connected to the protagonist of the book, The Ivory Throne, Sethu Lakshmibai, who died here in Bangalore.
That's
down this road.
That's going to be my next question, actually. The Ivory Throne, if we read it, it's not exactly about Sethu Lakshmibai herself. It's about the life of Travancore royal family, the way the transition happened when the princely state of Travancore to her.
Yeah.
But the point of view, so to speak, is a woman at the center of it.
Yeah.
Even though, if we really look at it, it's a patriarchal way of life. Yeah. What made you pick it up from Sethu Lakshmibai's, Rani Sethu Lakshmibai's POV?
So at a personal level, I think, and I've said this several times before, I think being exposed from childhood to very interesting women, not just strong women, but interesting women. If I think about my mother, grandmother, sister, they're all strong women, but each is interesting and very distinct. They don't fit one mold at all. Very different characters, very different styles, very different personalities. And yet there is this strong, almost family component of strength, in each of these women. They handle things very differently, yet there's something about them that I was exposed to from a very young age. And I think that does play a role in thinking that, instead of looking at male protagonists, and again, there are all these dozens of Rajas in Travancore, they didn't excite me because none of them did anything outside the mold. They were Rajas, they lived as Rajas, they died as Rajas. This particular lady interested me because she's a queen of Travancore from the age of 6. From 6, she was the queen, where she'd walk into a room and people would stand up and bow to her. And then she dies here in Bangalore, almost 90, 89 years old, as a completely different woman. A non-entity, obscure, unheard of by anybody here locally, and is cremated in a regular crematorium like anybody's grandmother. That arc of her life, and even now when people struggle so much to give up power, when you've enjoyed that kind of power, especially in her case, it wasn't just power. People viewed the royal family as living gods. The Queen of Travancore was seen as a living goddess. Anywhere she went, in fact, her great-grandson told me that when his father married into the family, the father's mother told him, when you see the Maharani, remember 2 things, that there is God in heaven and then there's God on earth, and she's God on earth. That's how you must treat her. Because the mother-in-law was a very orthodox royalist, and that was the view that people had of royalty in those days. So even today, when people struggle to give up power and wealth and status and influence, to give up not just power and influence, but also that semi-divine aura that people had around you, and to come to a completely different place in your 60s, reinvent yourself, adapt to change, give up your palaces, see them become public institutions, governments acquired it, things are happening. For me, that arc and that internal journey was very interesting. All said and done, she was still a privileged woman. She still had money. She still lived perfectly well all her life. That's all there. But I think psychologically for me, that was a very fascinating thing. How do human beings adapt? And most can't, but some can. And how do they manage? What are the internal sort of journeys that they go through? What is the turmoil that they have to deal with? I think those questions really interested me very much at a very human level. Then, of course, I was aware that, women get the short end of the stick in history. They're either wives or mothers or these side characters or footnotes. Whereas in this case, she had been turned into a footnote, but I was convinced that her story had something more to offer and that I wanted to bring her back into the spotlight. And that's essentially what I set out to do. It took 6 years, but in the end, the Ivory Throne, I think, has delivered.
And people saw it also. It's not just about some random woman. It was a real living, breathing person who went through that. And I think that's probably why it resonated with many people. Yeah. Maybe not as a royalty, but just as a human itself.
Yeah, very much.
And being a Malayali, I know what Marumakkathayam is. My mother is from northern Kerala, where the whole Marumakkathayam is, the matrilineal way of life is very high. And that's how the Travancore family also became. And yet, a matriarch, so to speak, to go into this kind of obscurity. Marumakkathayam, even today, it's a very convoluted concept for
most people can't understand it.
It's even today, I'm like, it's supposed to be on the mother's side. So if you could, as a historian with a little bit more perspective than that, can you help me understand what Marumakkathayam is?
Marumakkathayam is not matriarchy. People often use it synonymously with matriarchy, but it's
matrilineal.
Lineal. Yeah. So it is through the woman's line. So to essentially explain through a simple analogy, a family does not comprise of a man, his wife, and his children. A family is a woman, her children, and her grandchildren through the daughters. So male and female members are all accepted, but they have to be born to a female member of the family, not to a male member of the family. So in the Travancore royal family, the Raja's son was never the heir. And the Raja's wife was not the queen. The Raja's sister or aunt or niece was the queen. Sethu Lakshmi Bai was the previous Maharaja's niece. And that's how the crown passed. And it was the nieces and the aunts and the sisters and the women in the family who produced the next generation of the royal family members. Whereas the Rajas or the male members' sons were not considered members of the family. And that's the case in ordinary families like ours also. To the extent that when my father passed away in 2019, we did have there was this conversation in the background as to whether his nephew should also participate in the funeral rites. Because traditionally, they are the ones who would burn or bring the flame to the fire. Whereas now, modern times, so the son gets to do it. But I remember father's case, I did it myself. But my grandfather's case, maternal grandfather, I did it. The other grandson, my cousin, he was also there. But a nephew also stood and he also did it. Because we were like, let's tick all the boxes. We are doing it out of emotional reasons. But for traditional reasons, since the sister's son has the higher claim, let him also be part of it. And it was the three of us who sort of lit the pyre. So in some ways it continues even now. Ritually it does continue. I have my father's surname, but I belong to my mother's family. If somebody asks me my Kula Devam, it is my mother's Kula Devam.
Correct.
If it's the caste or subcaste, it's my mother's side technically. Even though my father was a Pillai or whatever, it's my mother's side that matters.
Yeah, same here with my son also. Like as I said, my mother is from northern Kerala, which is where this whole matrilineal idea is still there. So my husband is his mother's family.
Correct. Yeah.
My son is my mother's family.
Yeah, exactly.
but then so it becomes a little, and from what I have understood, trying to explain that to somebody who has not been able to live through it is a little.
I'll tell you, my grandfather, I was at one point, I made a family tree. I was like researching my own ancestors and our histories. And I asked my grandfather, what were your parents' names? He told me his mother's name. He told me his father's name. Okay, what were your grandparents' names? So he told me his mother's parents' names. Then he came to his father and he was like, actually, I have no idea who my father's parents were. Like, especially the father's father, he has no clue. He has no clue who his paternal grandfather was. They knew Achan, they knew father who had come and married into the family, but they had no, and if they ever spoke about the father's father, they'd just say Apupan, father's father. They never actually asked what the man's name was. They had no idea what their father's name was. And then I asked my grandfather's sisters, I asked his brothers, everybody who's alive in that family asked, not a single one of them knows their own paternal grandfather's name. Not because he didn't exist or because there was something wrong there, but it was just that they knew him as Apupan and never bothered to find out which family he came from or what his actual formal name was. And that's how real Marumakkathayam can get for a lot of people. They may not even know who their father's father is. And at some point, even the father did not matter that much. It was the uncle who mattered more than the father.
Don't you think that's a little sad that people are just kind of, especially in the way we have Indians and we have more of oral history, when it is not completely passed on properly, people do tend to get erased itself from.
In fact, I'm a big advocate of people sort of discovering their own family histories, because again, we fall into the trap of thinking of people as our parents, as our grandparents, but they're also individuals. They have a ton of stories to tell. And in my own family, I've collected a lot of stories. In fact, to the extent that I remember once a cousin of my mother's, an uncle of mine, was highly offended because I said something about where the original family house was or something. He's like, how do you know this? I don't know this. I'm 60-something-year-old. How old are you? How do you know this? And I was like, I know this because I've sat with every old person in the family from my teens, who are all now gone, taken notes in notebooks about what the family legends and stories were, what the names of family members were, created family trees. And I have the data because I took the time to sit with them and find out. None of you bothered to do that. And now you're asking me where I know the information or where I've got this information from. I've got it from our elders. It's only that I actually asked. And if we all ask, we're actually going to find rather interesting stories.
It all comes down to documentation, right? You took copious notes.
Yeah, I guess.
You took copious notes. Otherwise, your history would have been erased just like most of us.
But it's also interesting because in those note takings, often, say, one old person would tell you something, another would tell you the same story, but with a slightly different twist. Because it might be the same experience, but the two of them have experienced it differently. and they remember it differently.
Perspective.
And those also matter, because it's not like there's only one truth about these things, right? For each person sort of dealing with an event, the way or experiencing an event, the way they do it or the way they approach is very different. This very interview, right? I'm seeing you a certain way, you're looking at me a certain way. We can't really tell, right? Like we might exit this room with very different ideas about how this went, what were the best parts of the interview, things like that. So when we relate this to a third person, I might highlight certain questions that you asked me thinking, oh, these were the ones I really liked. You might highlight some completely different questions saying these were the areas that you thought were more interesting in this interview. And both are equally legitimate.
I actually have noticed that about you. You take time to take a moment to see that there is always two sides to any story, or two perspectives, rather than sides where it becomes a little bit more convoluted, it becomes a little bit more offensive, for the lack of a better word. You have always taken time to kind of make the other person understand there is always another perspective to look at it. It might be a square window, but when you look at it from an angle, it's a different view altogether.
No, even with my books, I never make the claim that this is the truth, right? This is my understanding of the truth based on the evidence I have and the sort of intellectual ideas I have applied, the lens that I have brought to it, and this is how I've interpreted it. A third person may read the same evidence slightly differently. I mean, radically different is not possible if you're looking at the same material in a rational, reasonable way. But yet there may be small fluctuations in how you interpret certain events, how you read certain things, how you understand certain documents, and so on. And that's perfectly natural, right? Again, people think that, historians take sides and they say one thing at one point, something else at some other point. The point is, history is about debate. We are actually constantly disputing each other. What is an academic PhD thesis? You pick a subject, or you find an argument that's perhaps been made before, you nuance it. You either reject it or you push back against it and you say, it's a great argument, but here are some flaws, let me highlight it. You're constantly debating with each other, and that is the nature of history. We were never there, right? We were not there when these things happened. We are trying to put together what happened right now based on some pieces of evidence that we have. We may not even have all the pieces. So if it's a jigsaw puzzle, you may actually not have all the pieces with you, and yet you have to form an impression of what the overall image actually represents. Now, in some cases, it's very tough. Ancient history is very tough with slender evidence, right? Because at the further back you go, those pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are fewer and fewer. But the further to our time you come, those pieces, there are more and more pieces. Then the question is is this the right piece? Who made this piece? You can get into other arguments and debates altogether. So history is fascinating for me precisely because we are not delivering answers or final sort of voices on things. We are still constantly interpreting. And in my own journey, right, when I started at the age of 25, I'm 34 now. I'll be 35 next year, 10 years in this. My own perspectives will shift. A lot of things as I experience more, as I read more, as I learn more, as I tackle different subjects, the way I interpret the world will also change. So it's entirely possible that 30 years down the line, when I'm much older and one of the older historians with a magnifying glass, as you were putting it, at that time, I might revise some of my own early conclusions, and that is entirely natural. It is a human process. We are also human beings dealing with this, and that's essentially the fun of history. That you're always open to questions and you're always open to new possibilities. And if you become rigid about things, then there's no point in doing history.
This brings back me to 2 points over here. First of all, it's history, which means his story. That's the way with a lot of puns have worked around, and also. The quote has always stayed with me. History is written from the perspective of the victors. And would you say it is true? A. And B, how much of factualness is in it and how much of it is a little bit of change of, or the rather actual deliberate change in perspective, like there is a propaganda to be put in.
I mean, there's no doubt that there is a gender problem in history, in the sense that if you look at most of the archival material we have, the travel accounts, the diaries, etc., much of it is the male gaze and the male voice. Even a text like the Kama Sutra, going back some 2000 years or whatever, is from the male gaze. It has some aspects of it are actually favorable to women, but it's still from the male gaze that the whole account has been written. There are fewer female voices that shine through in history. They are there, but you have to really look for them and then sort of bring them to light. So there is a gender problem in history. Even now, among historians, it is extremely important to have diversity of voices. You can't just have male historians constantly, talking about things. I always give this example about how in a lot of earlier works on the Mughals that I read, the women in the court were always treated as a side thing. Oh, they were in the harem. The harem was this semi-domestic sort of place. If at all there was politics happening, it was scheming, intriguing, that kind of thing. All the drama was in the male spaces. But in reality, that's not true. If you read a book like Ira Mukhoti's Daughters of the Sun, it shows you that these women in the Mughal family were also political actors. The harem was also a political institution that had political influence and power. But it took a female historian to come and reorient our gaze, because the men just assumed, because of various blinkers, that it doesn't matter, right? It's not something, what could possibly be interesting in a space that women occupy? They just assumed there wouldn't be anything. I'm just giving a very rudimentary kind of example. And that can happen to everybody. Another thing that I always highlight is that another 20 years from now, there will be an LGBTQ perspective on a lot of these things. And each time it's bringing a new perspective. So when you have a new perspective, like for me, once you've studied the feminist literature and you bring on board the feminist gaze, you can apply that gaze to all the evidence, and it actually helps. In future, if there's an LGBTQ perspective, we might study the same evidence in fresh ways and find new interesting problems and new things that we missed earlier, simply because we were not trained to look for them, right? So in that sense, history has been rather male-dominated. It has been men's voices and men's stories more than women's stories. To the extent that there's a scholar called Arik Moran who, I think, in a study on the Rajput Hill states, he highlights how there were women who actually wielded power and had a major say in things that took place in the early 19th century. But when records were made, Rajput cultural mores were such that women could not be written about in that way. Women had to be presented always in this idealized maternal kind of frame. So the same women who actively did do things ended up being written about in a very different way. So if you go purely by those records, you don't really see them. But then when you play it against other sources of evidence, you realize, hold on, this record is very slanted in a certain way. You have to flesh out the character in a different way. So I think, yes, the gender problem is there. This also ties into what you were saying about history being written by the victors. If the history of women has been written by men, we already have a problem there. The history of one race being written by another race, we have a problem there. We were a colonized country.
Correct.
For the longest time, our past was told to us by English historians writing from the colonizer's gaze, trying to subtly or not justify colonization, saying that, oh, ye to hona tha. This was bound to happen to you, and we are here to actually take you to the next stage. It took decolonization, a process that is still happening, for us to start rejecting some of those. Sometimes at a conceptual level. Sometimes concepts can be loaded against us. A simple word like religion, for most people, when they think of religion, they think of a book, they think of certain, institutions and all of that. Whereas for a lot of Eastern religions, that's not the format. That doesn't mean they're not good religions or there's something wrong with them. It simply means that the concept of religion has to be expanded. We use the word religion from a Western frame and assume that if something doesn't have a book or doesn't have certain institutions, then it's not really a religion, it's just culture, it's this, that, right?
For us, I will actually add to that, at least according to my perspective. For me, religion is the way I have practiced my faith. I have certain spiritual leanings, certain learnings that I have gotten handed down to be by my parents. I question it. I ask I've been known to be the
rebel,
the pot stirrer,
yeah.
where some random thing, it just happens. Why? The why has never been answered. And today I would actually be doing it and telling the same thing to my son at the same time. But the why has not, although it has not yet been answered, I still go by it because it's part of something that I believe is a faith that I have, not just because I pray to a particular God or because I read a particular scripture or I say those things, but my religion is my religion. My religion does not really have to align with somebody else's religion. So I completely get where you are coming from, but today we do not have an English word per se.
I mean, the best example is the Indian word dharma.
Dharma
cannot be translated as religion.
Correct.
Some people translate it as righteousness. That's also a limiting thing. The frank truth is we haven't got an English word that encapsulates what the word dharma actually means, at least in Indian context. And we can use dharma also in different ways, depending on context. So that kind of fluidity is very difficult in a cultural space and a linguistic space where there are these rigid boxes and these preset definitions, and preset by people coming from a different part of the world, and of course the language itself came from another part of the world, right?
The English language, in fact, if you really look at the history of English language itself, that itself is like an amalgamation of many other languages
and words.
And even today, English is one word that is, it's thankfully English is one word that is fluid. Despite being a certain rigid sense, it's still fluid enough.
That's my other point, right? Like when people talk about decolonization, a lot of people say that we must discard all these colonial things. Frankly, I don't think you can this is not a car that you put in reverse and sort of pull back. You can't. History has happened. This has already happened. In India, colonization happened. We've got English, whether we like it or not. Now it's very tough to say, oh, we must cancel out English and replace everything with Hindi, because then that's also not organic. Then you're also artificially trying to engineer something, which is not possible. Think of it the other way, which is that the English language came here very much as the colonizers' language, very much a language in a sense that they made us speak at the cost of so many other languages. But then what did we do as Indians? We took over that language. We took over it, started arguing nationalism in that language, started arguing anti-British stuff in that language, whether it's Gandhiji writing in English against the British, whether it's even figures like Savarkar, controversial figure, but even he uses English as a weapon to put forth revolutionary ideas or whatever it is. Is it Hindutva? Who are the Hindus? I think that's the original title. Who is a Hindu? Sorry. These books were also published in English because they were meant to reach a pan-Indian audience in that language. Railways, similarly, everybody knows that the British brought in railways not for Indians' benefit, to move around troops and to move around goods and for their economic interests. That's what they were doing with the railways. But we took over the railways. We started using it for pilgrimages. Gandhiji started traveling in the railways for nationalistic purposes. He would put his head out at every railway station, use it as a political platform to make anti-British speeches. So just because something comes from the outside doesn't mean that we can't subvert it and make it our own and completely reorient its purpose, which we've done in India. So even though a lot of concepts have come to us from outside, it's not as if we can wipe the slate clean and go back to some pristine version. There is no pristine version. You and I are Malayalis. Malayalam itself has so many words that have come from Portuguese and other Persian and other Indian languages and foreign languages. You can't dissect the language, remove all the foreign influences and say that you have an original version of the language. Then you've got a very depleted language. And then some people have tried to populate it with Sanskrit or whatever. That's also artificial. These words have come in a natural way through natural human encounters and social encounters. That's just how the world operates. So same with colonization and all of these concepts. They've come in an aggressive, negative way, but we co-opted them, gave it a positive spin of our choosing, and we've owned it. And that is where I think that's the healthy way to look at a lot of these things, that we can always own things and make it our own and move on from there.
So, Manu, this is where my question, you talked about dharma. There has been this whole drama surrounding Sanatana Dharma. Then there is that. And then you have been calling our nation, country, as India. There is another whole new, other separate debate about is it Bharat or India. When government of Bharat became. It's, for me, when I am speaking English, I will say India. When I'm saying it in Malayalam, when I'm talking about our country in Malayalam, say Bharatam.
Yeah.
When I'm talking about it in Hindi, I'll say Bharat. What I don't understand and what I would like somebody else to help me understand, help our viewers get another perspective is that, why there is a debate and should there be a debate? And if not, what can be the most ideal pace of using the word India itself?
See, I don't think I will ever say there should be no debate. I think everything is up for debate. It's perfectly fine to debate these things. In fact, it triggers all kinds of interesting conversations. Sometimes it holds up a mirror. We do realize that, yes, we are using a word that ultimately foreigners gave us. But at the same time, should it aggravate us? Should it make us feel less? Not really. Like even the word Hindu, right? It doesn't really come out of any Indian language. It is of foreign origin, but we've owned it and now everybody uses it, right? So debate is fine. I don't think that's a problem. But any kind of mentality where we think that one is purer, one is less pure, those kind of things are where things are getting unnecessarily controversial and unnecessarily political. As you said, the word Bharat and India have always been used. The constitution uses both words. In different languages, we use different words. It's like the French, right? When they talk about their capital in English, they'll say Paris. If they're speaking in French, they'll say Paris. Both are perfectly fine. Same with Bombay and Mumbai. If I'm speaking in Marathi to somebody, I'll say Mumbai tun ata aloy or whatever. But if I'm speaking to someone else, I might say Bombay. Sometimes I'll still say Mumbai. These things can happen naturally. It doesn't need to be either or. You have to pick one over the other. There is Bengaluru and there's Bangalore. You can use that in completely different contexts and both can feel equally normal. I don't think there's any case to be made that we must necessarily pick one over the other and sort of beat our chests and be like, this is now purer and we are proud of it. That's politics. That's a political conversation. That's not necessarily the way society actually evolves or functions. These are political triggers. Sometimes these debates are triggered purely for political goals, purely to, achieve certain ends or whatever, which is also fine. But we should just have the capacity to recognize what is political manipulation and what is a serious debate engaging with issues of the past and so on.
So, but then when you say it's basically all politics, right now we are at a juncture in media, in our lives, the way society is functioning, at least here. Everything has become political. Anything that you pick up has become so political and so polarized. You can't really tell what is fact, what is truth, what is half lies, what are complete lies. The lines have blurred so much, it's become a completely convoluted canvas of where do we go from here. Because see, and coming back to when you say politics of names itself, there have been entire chapters that now the history students who are going to be in class 6, there are chapters that have been wiped out or replaced with another perspective altogether. How do we bring it back to something that works for today's generation, something that will give them a foothold, a foundation on which to build another perspective altogether, rather than the one that we have, imposed on them?
See, everything is always political. It's just that I think the key word you're looking for is the one you use, which is polarized. Things have always been political, but things have not necessarily been so polarized where someone who doesn't agree with me automatically becomes my enemy. No, somebody who doesn't agree with me on that particular point. That doesn't mean I hate them forever. And you're seeing the repercussions of this all the way up to Parliament, right? Where at one point, if you're in the opposition, it's almost like you're against the country or whatever. No, you're not enemies. You're both sent there by people to represent different kinds of views. One gets to form the government. The other still gets the right to voice its opinion because they too have been sent there in order to represent exactly those things that they are raising. That's how it works. And this is not just an Indian phenomenon. Even the US and all of that, this big feud between the Democrats and Republicans as if they are enemies of each other. They're not meant to be enemies. They're meant to only represent different perspectives. What has changed is the fact that there was an agreement earlier on the ground rules, the basic protocols by which we would agree to disagree, the basic understandings on the basis of which institutions would be run. Right now, what's happening is that a lot of those ground rules themselves are being challenged and thrown up, like factuality. Earlier, you would have to have factuality when you make certain statements. Now, clearly not. Even presidents can essentially talk out of their you-know-where and just put out whatever they want, and it's considered politics. That should not be acceptable. When you're a president, there is a ground rule or a basic standard to which you must be held, which is honesty and integrity. Those things cannot be challenged, right? That's what I think makes all the difference. This churning that's happening where the ground rules themselves are being challenged and shifted and manipulated and all of that is happening partly for historical reasons. Remember, when the printing press came, it caused great disruption in the world. Suddenly, books became cheaper. You could print a lot more volumes, religious stuff. In the West, stuff like the Bible. The Bible used to be preserved in sacred languages like Latin, couldn't be translated. It was only interpreted for you by other people. The printing press and vernacularization, translation into German and French or whatever it is, completely altered it. The printing press allowed the Bible to go out to other cultures which did not believe in the Bible and interrogate the Bible. Same with Hindu scriptures. The printing press allows the Vedas, which till then only some people could access, to be printed and be interpreted and analyzed by people from completely different cultures. So it created a great disruption, created a great churn. But through that churn, we finally got out and we found a stable kind of peace. And I think we're also going through, I'm an optimist, I think we're also going through a time of churn. There's the internet, the world is changing at a very fast pace. Knowledge is developing at a very fast pace. So it feels a bit like, oh my God, what is happening? Like, is anything stable anymore? But I think stability will return slowly. Already you're seeing that about 5-7 years ago, misinformation on WhatsApp was a big thing. It's still a big thing. But increasingly, especially if you look at the last elections and so on, you'll find that increasingly, I think people are also getting a sense of, okay, hold on, maybe everything that comes on my screen, I cannot believe. I need to verify this or I need to cross-check it. Increasingly, you're finding that people are starting to rely on some journalists, some voices, because they may not trust the entire ecosystem, but they will trust that particular voice to give them something to think about. Maybe not voice their position on the audience, but to generally present the look, this is how I view it, and you guys do with it what you want. So I think correctives to a lot of what we see are natural and they will slowly evolve, but we just have to be patient and wait for it. We are truly living through interesting times. How we come out of this, I don't know, but we will come out of it, and I think there will be some form of stability that evolves.
You remind me of Yogendra Yadav, who got to talk.
I'm very flattered by that comparison. Thank you.
He said the same thing. In fact, he put it in a word that the first republic of India is over. The second is yet to be built. We are in this one phase where it's being hammered out. We're trying to figure out what it will look like. Where it's going to happen from. And that is, I'm guessing he also has an optimistic view where maybe by the time the next generation comes into picture, there is a little bit of more stability, that the second republic is there. He was talking about people's revolution. He was talking about people's movement. And maybe books like yours, which gives another perspective altogether, puts history in a perspective, which is, for the lack of a better word, phrase, a neutral perspective. That, how long do you think that's going to take?
I don't frankly know. I think we just have to keep doing what we do. At the moment, for example, there's lots of new historical works coming out from other political camps, as it were. Earlier, the understanding was that there was a sort of leftist leaning in Indian history, or at least the dominant strain was leftist and other voices were sort of blocked out. Now, clearly, there is a strong rightist element also emerging. You can see it in publishing houses. Their books are really selling well. Again, I don't see it as a lament. I don't see it as a bad thing. There's a lot of challenge in it. There's a lot I disagree with, but giving those voices an outlet and then challenging them is what I think will help us reach a position that is stronger. If you keep blocking it out or saying that, oh, this is garbage, I'm not even going to engage with it, then you're still continuing the problem. You're allowing this thing to fester. Whereas let it come, let me engage with it, let me read with it, and then show you why I don't buy the arguments that you're making. That to me is the right way to go, because then you can make the case as to why this is not persuasive, and then you set a new standard, and that standard people can then build on, if you see what I mean.
But Manu, that's where my kind of small issue comes over, because you are one voice, you are a saner voice.
Thank you.
Because, as you said, maybe because you are so steeped in history, you are able to give that one neutral perspective where you are actively trying not to take sides.
This is actually quite fascinating, because in Kerala especially, I remember some people thought I was a leftist historian. Some people now say I'm a right-wing historian. I remember a friend of mine sent me a screenshot, I think, of a YouTube comment where somebody said, oh, this guy, I heard the BJP is offering him a ticket for the Kerala Lok Sabha election. I laughed. I was like, BJP people, on Facebook, I got pure abuse from BJP supporters for some things I've written. And here, somebody else, because I wrote something else, is accusing me of being a BJP acolyte. I write on a different subject that upsets the left. Their trolls will come over saying, oh, this guy is so anyway right-wing. The right will say, oh, this guy is a leftist. So in that sense, I think I'm doing something right, because everybody seems to be equally upset, and that suggests that I'm okay.
Which is why I said your works actively try to. I mean, we all come up with our own perspectives. We have that unconscious perspective that we all come with. It doesn't. It comes with age. You can't really. It's very unconscious. It's that unconscious bias that people call. That's the unconscious bias that you have. But maybe because you are somewhere at the back of your head aware of this unconscious bias, your voices, the way you write history, the way you tell a story of somebody, someone that was there, something that was there, it comes out in a wholesome picture. Yet, when you look at the books that are the books in the sense, the books that our children are reading, books that today's history students are reading, the way that is written, that has a perspective that is either, you said, it has a propaganda to it. Now,
to be honest, all government-approved textbooks tend to have an element of that across different periods, across countries. You go to Britain and you read their textbooks on history, they barely talk about things that the British Empire did in other parts of the world. For them, the British Empire was this wonderful thing that, sadly came to an end. That's often the approach or the underlying sort of tone that a lot of their history textbooks present. So all governments everywhere, when they are in control, they either try to push a nationalistic narrative or some form of narrative or the other that suits them. Yes, it's true that right now, as I said, it's gone to a level where factuality itself doesn't seem to matter. Sometimes things are being just invented and all of that. That is a cause for concern because it's being fed to children at a very young age. The reason I'm optimistic is that this is also being very strongly contested. It is still being contested. People are pushing back. Look, kids are also, to be honest, the one good thing is these textbooks are so boring that kids are not, other than their exams, they're not going to absorb too much from it. Some kids might. Increasingly, I'm finding that a lot of the kids are now absorbing their information on video. And there are good YouTubers. The thing is, you may get into the wrong lane and you might find some conspiracy theorist telling you how all of history is terrible and Romila Thapar is the worst thing that happened to Indian history and all of that. That is always there, but there's also equal space for good stuff to exist on the internet network. That's not been policed or controlled by any one party so far. So there are actually good.
Although there is the new bill.
I believe so, but they pulled it back for now. The new broadcast.
There was policing all across. The words were so that the policing itself, it was evident.
With technology, the states are going to be very tempted to increase their power using technology because they can surveil us at every level. I barely make a cash transaction now. Everything is GPay or card or whatever. Technically, the government in that sense can figure out what I was eating 10 years ago on a certain day at a certain time from simply looking at my bank records. What clothes I'm wearing, what undergarment brand I use, everything becomes clear simply through a study of our financials. It's unprecedented power and a window into our lives that the government has at the moment, if they so choose, if they choose to sort of get into that. Or if we don't have legislation that prevents them from accessing that level of granular detail about citizens' lives. And there are very good lawyers who are fighting and pushing back against this. They are writing about privacy. Apar Gupta, people of that, Gautam Bhatia, these are people I love reading their op-eds and stuff because they are explaining in an accessible way to the public why these things are important questions. These are not random questions that only a few elites worry about. It affects everybody. Eventually they'll be able to predict all kinds of AI and stuff. You'll be able to predict all kinds of things about people's behaviors and their patterns of voting and things like that. So possibilities are really bad and that are really scary at one level. But again, if you look at it throughout history, no matter how much power there is, injustice always has a shelf life. It can be longer in some cases, shorter in other cases, but I have always found that injustice cannot, in the long term, stretch itself out permanently. It's not possible. And human beings at some level, I'm convinced, still have the capacity, no matter what, to fight back and resist what they see as unjust and improper. And that just keeps resurrecting itself constantly. It's a trend you find throughout history. That's one of the reasons I'm an optimist. I neither get swayed by negative things happening around me because I've seen this has happened so many times in the past. And yes, that's always been corrected. Some way or the other, it gets rebalanced. Not in the same way as before. We can never go back into an idyllic golden age from earlier, but a new form of balance evolves over a period of time. I'm a believer, therefore, in that, which is that no matter how much propaganda is there, how much technology can be used against us, against citizens, how much a combination of propaganda and technology can cloud our understanding of reality itself, correctives will also emerge on
How much of that thought is coming out of your time with Dr. Tharoor?
Oh, he's also an optimist, I think. I don't think neither of us are fatalists. Neither of us think the world is going to end tomorrow and everything has already gone to the dogs. I think it comes also from that tendency to just sit back and look at the larger picture. I don't spend too much time on Twitter, for example. Twitter is a very fighty space and it's very easy to get drawn into this as if every day you're fighting some major battle and it's just problems and problems in the world. It's important and I do respect people who do fight those battles on Twitter, but that's not my skill set. My skill set is to zoom back a little bit, look at the larger picture, look at the pieces that are moving on the board, and then try to make sense of it. Think, okay, right now these set of pieces are looking really bad, and they are looking like they're on the ascendant. But if I look at the overall picture, not time to worry yet. I think a corrective is possible. And even the recent elections and all of that, a lot of people were surprised by the results. I frankly wasn't. Neither was I ecstatic about, oh, good. It's not about party choices. It's just that we do need opposition. I think for any democracy, it's very important that we have a healthy opposition and that the government is checked, even at state level. In what's happening in Bengal at the moment, I think, or even my home state of Kerala, I keep thinking the party should not have too much time in power, because then that incentive to cling on, that incentive or that tendency or that impulse to somehow just cement your place there, that becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. And it's healthier for people to always switch those who are in power, so that there's enough of a balance that's maintained as well.
You talk about Bengal and Kerala. We have, for the longest time, Kerala and Bengal has been called country cousins. It's like, it's a running joke that I have heard throughout my life, that both of them have had communist roots. Both of them were the last bastions of leftist way of life. Kerala is now the only last man standing sort of a thing. And yet there is so much of anger, so much of dissent towards Pinarayi Vijayan and his government. And today, it's like, there have been very too many op-eds that I have written that Pinarayi is trying to emulate. There have been dinner table conversations. Pinarayi is trying to emulate Prime Minister Narendra Modi, where he's trying.
They call him Mundurtha Modi.
Mundurtha Modi, and where this kind of, while there is this dissent. While looking at the larger picture, where is the alternative? Maybe to your optimism, I might be the fatalist or a pessimist who's like, this is not working, this is not working, this is not working. Where's the thing that is working?
It's not working for now, but answers will emerge. Again, firstly, I think a lot of these critiques are highly exaggerated also. I don't think overall in Kerala's larger trajectory, that play between Congress and the left has always benefited the state, I think, to a great extent. If Kerala is where it is today, I think the left does get a strong share of the credit for bringing in that culture of welfareism, of people's rights, making people aware of it and so on. I've heard so many relatives of mine in Kerala saying, oh, we don't get anybody to work today. Nobody will work for less than this amount of money. Yeah, why should anybody work for less? Why should they come and clean your dishes for a smaller amount? It's a good thing that there are other alternatives, that people have other options where they can earn, if not more, something similar without having to come and sort of kowtow in front of you, right? Kerala's created that kind of space, and I think that's a healthy space to be in. But just at the broader level, I do believe that it is healthier for a country or a state or a people or a society to make sure that no one group of voices or ideologies gets too much time and power, because that just creates a wrong set of incentives to then cling on, etc., etc. There's a whole set of ripple effects. Whereas constantly switching, constantly balancing out who's in power, constantly playing one against the other is good for citizens, right? One set of parties is promising me better welfare, great, I'll vote for them. Next one, somebody else is promising me, I don't know, industrialization, jobs, whatever, good, let's get some of that also. It's that push and pull that ultimately helps us evolve. And if we lose the push and pull and everything becomes just pull onto one side, then it's not healthy. It's that tension. The best things come out of that tension between two poles, right? That tension is what keeps dynamism, innovation, thinking out of the box, all of that possible. If everything is pulled onto one side, imagine if gravity on the earth was lopsided in one direction, everything will go topsy-turvy, right? It can't be like that. There has to be a basic level of balance. And I think that matters.
Well, in that case, my counter argument here would be there is no more balance. Like, you look at it, the CPIM created history for the first time when they won two consecutive. Yeah. It's not as if it never happened that both of them have not been in power. It has always been every 5 years they alternate. Yet this time around, it's going to be 10 years in 2026. Narendra Modi, BJP at the helm, it's going to go for 15 years now.
But in a much more sober way now. That heady kind of power that existed for 10 years has already been challenged. And I think something similar will happen in Kerala also. Again, not because one is choosing between parties, simply because it is natural. When the power is with the people, and that is what we must protect, when power is with the people, eventually they will switch. Remember also that time passes, right? A whole generation of kids who've known in 2014, there was a whole generation, I think the number was 250 million people, first-time voters or something, who had never known a government other than Manmohan Singh's government till then. Now it's the same thing happening with the Modi government, right? There's an entire generation of kids who are going to spend between 10 to 15 years of their lives, of their awakening years.
My son was born in 2014.
There you go. So his entire childhood, there's only been one prime minister. So by the time he comes to voting age, almost naturally, no matter how great the prime minister might be or not, almost as a natural human instinct and curiosity, he's going to be like, well, what are the other options? Can I look at somebody else? And those questions are natural. I think that's also perfectly fine. Right now, you're right about what you say, that there is no balance and all of that. I agree that there is overall a stressed kind of situation. The system in general is generally stressed out. And like there are these pulls in different directions, and it's not a very healthy position at the moment. But again, notice that this is not just India. This is not Kerala. This is not just India. This is around the world, which means this is part of a much bigger phenomenon that we as a species are having to deal with at this particular juncture. And as a historian, I can say that when such things happen, lots of unexpected things happen, but eventually a new kind of order is also formed. It will not be what we are familiar with. It will not be, perhaps sometimes in some measure, it may not even be what we like, but some form of stability will emerge out of it. And we just have to be thoda patient and look at the larger picture. Or at least this is the way I view the world. I don't get swayed by the immediate kind of things happening.
Well, you talk about long term, and one of my kind of passion projects, or rather passion topics, is the climate change. I have always been the believer, leave the world a little bit, better than what I found. I have not been able to in my life, because I see litter, I see more and more consumption. The materialistic consumption is increasing. I mean, there have been from 2018, 2019, last month, the way my state, and I call it my state, and yet what is happening in Kerala, it somewhere it hurts, and yet I am unable to do something about it. The thing is, even if I try to talk to people who can do something about it, they also come out as, they are unable to. They also want somebody to take up the mantle of doing this further. How? Who? Where?
I think the answer is very simple. Accountability. We have to have accountability. When you have these decisions being taken that affect the ecology of a place, the environment of a place, why is nobody being held accountable? Why aren't heads rolling? And I mean serious heads. I don't mean scapegoats. This is where I'm saying that ultimately the answer to most of our woes is in strengthening the citizen's position to hold power accountable at all levels, whether it's parliament, whether it's at the municipality level. Decisions. Why is it that these whole fragile areas of our state in Kerala have 1,000 resorts blooming? I mean, great for business, I guess, great for tourism and all of that, but you already know that this should not be done, which means some manipulation is happening. Somewhere you're looking consciously in the other direction. People have to be held accountable. I mean, the people in power have to be held accountable for those kinds of things. The moment we have an accountable power center and we have people who are capable of holding them to account, I think that's where we can actually reach solutions that will last and that will matter. Right now, what's happening is the entire accountability thing is broken, right? Even just now with what's happened in Calcutta, in the hospital, the rape case, it's just terrible. It's just terrible that something like this has happened, and already within hours, the politics has started around it. And there is this reluctance to take accountability on the part of the state government and a lot of its spokespersons who are otherwise very, very vocal about things. It's almost shameful, right? Like, till it doesn't happen, your state, you're very vocal about it, and vice versa. For those in Delhi sitting and criticizing Bengal, when it happened in states where they were in power, they will be quiet, but now they'll be extremely vocal. That kind of thing cannot be. We have to hold people accountable. Hypocrisy has to be called hypocrisy. When events like this happen, we can't just, there's this thing where like, oh, the Indian army came and they've done such a great job, let's clap. They have done a great job. But the point is, it is not their job to come and do this. This should not have happened to start with. Why did it happen? Who gave clearances for these constructions? Who gave clearances for the cutting of the forest? Who was ultimately responsible for letting these things happen? Are they ministers? Are they local power centers? What is happening? That's where we must sit down and do the serious homework. And that's where journalists matter, right? That's where journalists have to help us really uncover what is happening. Even in Bengal just now, it is the media that's essentially kept this, and then the people came out on the streets, etc. You need strong, accountable institutions that hold people accountable. Without all that, then, this will just keep continuing as a pattern. So even what's happening in Kerala, for me, the answer is always strong citizenry. You always have to have a strong citizenry and a system that does not hesitate to hold government accountable for events like this that take place.
But it comes back to the whole, what we started with, women becoming kind of footnotes or side stories, or even rather, a part of the indices at the end of the book. And rape in itself as an act is something that is a man's way of establishing power on the woman. I mean, if you really look at it from that perspective, that's when you understand that rape is never just about a physical violation of a body. It's not about, getting into somebody else's personal space. It's about, not taking that no for a no. It is about showing that I have more power than you, which is why I have the right to violate you. And that's what has happened with the doctor over there. In fact, there was this entire, thread of tweets where they were saying that why is the victim's name not being, she's no more. You can't really just put another name for it and say that, justice for Abhaya. She was a person. You cannot just make her another victim. She's no more. She was a person. You can't just, and that's why there was hashtag justice for so and so. And there is that whole other movement over there. And yet, what we see on TV is people ransacking, people going on a complete mob.
Easy, no? That's the easy solution, right? Like a flash of so-called rage. I'm hearing news that it was orchestrated rage and that there was a completely different agenda behind the mob going in there, which was apparently to destroy evidence. I don't know what is truth and falsehood at this juncture. But even then, that kind of flash of fury, it still doesn't solve the point. It doesn't solve the problem, right? Okay, you've been triggered to give an immediate response, an emotional response or whatever. But is that solving the problem? For that, you have to again go back to the structures. You have to again go back to who is responsible in that hospital, who is responsible for the overall setup, who's responsible for these laws that prevent certain accountability structures to come in place. That lady had to sleep in that room. That's what's happened.
That hall. That is a hall.
That's where the accountability point comes in. Her job wasn't to sleep there. Why was she forced to sleep there at that time of the night? It was because somebody else did not do their job. That's what I'm saying. Accountability matters. She lost her life simply because somebody else did not do what they were meant to do. Somebody else, people in responsible positions, failed to create an infrastructure that would allow her to sleep at a place where she would be safe and where it was an assigned place for that. This kind of ad hoc business, the poor lady went in thinking that she was going to get some rest. We know what happened, right? It wasn't her fault. It was entirely the people who were meant to do what they didn't do. I think that's what I'm saying. Accountability is, for me, again, I'm maybe viewing it from my lens, but for me, that is the person or that is the power center that has to be found, saying you are responsible for this. It is not her. It is not what she was wearing. It is not what, you'll say, okay, that guy was the rapist and came in or whatever. Firstly, how did he get in there? How did he become entrenched in the system? If there were other people involved, whatever, like how did that happen? Ultimately, where does it go back to? Accountability. Who was in charge of this place? They have to be the ones to give the answers on this. She was not meant to sleep there. She was not supposed to even find herself in that situation. The reason she found herself is because somebody else did not do their job. And I think that is the tragedy of this, which is that it is actually on the face of it, if you think about it, for that guy, whoever is responsible for this, it's a banal thing, no? All these doctors, they'll manage. He or she would have thought of it that way. But look at the consequences that have played out, right? It is not banal. Every small decision that we take, especially in positions of power, affects other people, affects large numbers of other people. The greater your power, the greater your responsibility, and therefore the greater your accountability must be. And that, I think, we have to really start holding people to account. And I think that's happening now, with the Bengal government and all of that. Even the rage that people are feeling against the government, it's entirely justified. This government may deliver great prosperity to the people, whatever, like you can deliver all of that. But if you're not going to be accountable when these issues arise, then there's no point to it. No?
You talk about accountability. And now there's this whole... I'm trying to kind of imagine you as a historian writing the history of today, 30 years from now, or any historian. You are just the face of that one historian who would be writing. How will this pan out? I mean, like it's such a churn. There's so much muddy waters. In Malayalam, I would actually, the phrase is Kalani. When will it tell you? When it's going to get clear? Because it has been in this churn for a while now.
I think, these things are sometimes cyclical. If you look at the 20th century, at the beginning, we still had these empires, we still had these emperors and kings, including in Europe and other places. In China, there was still an empress in the early part of the 20th century. You have the two world wars. Then there's instability. And that's what leads to the Second World War, right? Then you have then out of these two world wars come in people who say, look, this cannot become a pattern. We have to think big. We have to work with each other, create institutions. Those institutions have their own issues. They were also lopsided in one way or the other. They had their own power equations that were not fair. And yet they created an infrastructure through which for the next half of the 20th century, we largely had a stable kind of world, right? Like there was the Cold War or whatever, but in general, there was a sense that, okay, if I'm born at this point, I can broadly predict that this is where I'm going to end up when I'm retiring. We today don't have that stability.
We do not have
We
that.
have no idea at 80 whether we'll have money, whether we'll have pensions, whether we'll have any kind of future.
Whether we have houses.
Whether we'll be alive. This whole like higher and higher incidence of cancer. There's so much changing. Right?
Yeah.
So I think we are living through our version of the first part of the 20th century. That
Yeah.
it is muddy, it is chaotic. And I think the answers will emerge. The tragedy would be that if it took great, horrible events to happen in order to reach a solution or to find our way, that would be tragic. Because that's what happened in the 20th century. 2 world wars is what it took to see reason and try and design something that was better. We can't afford that, especially a country like India. We cannot go
We are
through
having
that.
smaller tragedies here and there. I mean, look at what happened in Wayanad. Look at what happened in Himachal.
Yeah.
Look at what is happening in the way, small. There might be isolated incidents when it comes to a pothole over here, or somebody dying of a random accident over there. But when you put it in a larger perspective, as you said, when you look at it from a broader, bird's eye view, you realize that there is an underlying cause for it.
Yeah.
That is where that accountability was not there, where people were not looking at long term, and yet that fear somewhere has set in, and that's the fear that we are probably giving down to the next generation, the coming generation itself. When you talked about journalists, yes, you were saying something.
No, I mean, kids, now they're so aware of climate change, partly because they're realizing that can we predict anything about our lives? Just look at every summer in this country getting worse and worse. We are talking about jobs and this and that, and kids are like, hold on, like, can we even get out of the house and walk? Is that the place the world is heading to? I still remember how in the 90s and when I was growing up, the world was so much more stable. At least to us, it seemed very much like a stable world. Right?
It's more than stable. Yeah, it was safer. At least we were not worried about if somebody is going to. Well, at least our parents weren't worried that somebody is going to grab us over there, or they were not going to work over. We won't be able to walk after dark, or they will be somebody or the other will be too rageful to hurt themselves too much. Like, ho gaya, theek hai, he did something, he kicked you, fine, go ahead, you kick him back, or something or the other, or don't kick him back, and just talk to them. There were millions of things, just let go, because there was some sort of a, feeling of safety that it's going to work out for them. Today,
that's why if I had to, 30 years from now, write a book about what this would be called, it would be called The Age of Anxiety. At multiple levels, we are anxious as people. Our children are anxious, really, from a very young age, because they have no clarity as to how the world is evolving, how they are going to evolve into this world. And it's an age of political anxiety also. It's an age of social anxiety also. So for me, this is the age of anxiety. There's just no other way to describe it.
So 30 years from now, Age of Anxiety would be a book.
This book could be written in the next 5 years also, because I don't think the anxiety is going away.
You can start writing it 5 years from now.
We start making our notes right away.
Yeah, right away. We will all exchange our notes. You can get a compendium of things from all the people who will. You open up your Instagram, then you will have an entire footnote worth of.
But I think it's also. Again, I'm still optimistic about these things. It's partly also because news comes to us way faster than ever before. I still remember a time when the news came once in the morning, once in the evening. There were these bulletins. And at 6:30, I remember my grandparents would turn on the TV, or 6 o'clock, and there'd be a half an hour a news program or whatever. That was the total of news you got in a day. Then you had to wait till the newspaper came the next morning. We are now constantly being fed news from around the world. Constantly. Every second, there's something or the other happening. So we are saturated in that. It's only natural that we feel that sense of pressure. That's why I say that sometimes just zooming back, cutting off a little bit from all of this, and just looking at the world as it actually is unfolding versus as it seems to be on our screens, can help reorient us. It doesn't mean that those things on the screen are not happening. It's just that we also still need to practically be able to function in this world, right? Therefore, that slight cutting off and just grounding ourselves a little bit and saying, look, which are the battles I can fight? What is it that I can do? Can I, in my position, do something on climate change? I don't think so. It's not really my area, really. Can I do something on politics? Not really. I don't have the last name or hundreds of crores to fight an election. Can I do something on the cutting edge of science? No, I'm not a tech guy, I'm not a science guy. But can I contribute to conversations on the past? Because the past is political. The way the past is interpreted, we are changing the names of cities, we're fighting over old monuments. Past is therefore very alive today. That is the space where I can contribute, and therefore that is the place where I will concentrate my energies instead of dissipating it on 1,000 Instagram posts on all topics. Because as I only have one life here, I only have a shelf life that will last a certain number of years. In that period, how can I make a contribution in a healthy, capable, practical way? That's how I tend to think of it, which is I've chosen my lane is this. Any contribution I make to the world will have to be through this lane, because otherwise my energy will get scattered and I'd end up doing nothing really overall.
We kind of moved from the whole name change thing. I mean, for the longest time, even today when I'm talking about Thiruvananthapuram, Trivandrum, it's easier to say. Kochi is easier to say than Ernakulam. Calicut is so much easier to say than Kozhikode. We try to tell everything. It's basically a tongue twister for everybody. And yet, we are still trying to mispronounce a word rather than use the anglicized version of it. Although Quilon is not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
What do you think happened here?
Look, at one point, I think as societies find themselves and they sort of define, we're always redefining ourselves, right? What Malayaliness meant 50 years ago is not necessarily what it means today, because the Malayali himself is globalized now. The Malayali herself is all over the place, in Dubai, America, here and there. So the definitions also change, and almost every generation has to find itself and find its own way of defining who they are. Now, as societies go through various transitions, sometimes, yes, we will feel the need that, okay, why are we using a word that the British used? When we have our dear old Thiruvananthapuram or Tirundoram, why should we say Trivandrum? Fine, say Tirundoram. That's why I was earlier saying that doesn't mean you have to erase Trivandrum by force from everywhere. These are organic transitions. Start using Tirundoram, no problem. Put it everywhere you want. Let Trivandrum also exist. Over a period of time, one will automatically go out of fashion. The other will automatically become the dominant one. It will happen naturally over a period of time. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. These are not pressing issues of the day, right? These are not, whether I say Tirundoram or Trivandrum, makes no difference to the state of the roads there, for example. All the same, I will not say that human existence is just good roads and good air and efficiency and good functioning cities. We are also cultural creatures. People do care about culture. People do feel that our language matters. And I totally understand and respect that as well. You know, Malayalam, especially in this age of globalized English and English being the language of power, a lot of Indian languages will feel like they're getting some kind of stepmotherly treatment, right? Like, you know, all the big bucks in publishing are in English, whereas regional languages have really fine literature. But I forget which book it was, edited by Rashmi, I think, on Indian literature. Someone was telling me about this and how there was nothing that wasn't written in the English language in India. It was only Indian English writing, and they had actually not gone for short stories or contributions from Indian languages, which could then have been translated or whatever. But whereas in reality, some of the best books are being written in Indian languages. So I understand that we must respect, preserve, and actively promote our regional and linguistic identities also. To that extent, I'm perfectly happy to say Thiruvananthapuram. No problem. You know, it's fine. It's just this constant artificial battle saying, oh, either Trivandrum or Thiruvananthapuram. That I think is a bit overstated. I think we can manage to do both, because again, you want the Malayali lives all over the world, right? So the Malayali needs the capacity to say Trivandrum and Thiruvananthapuram, because you have to exist in both
and
places.
also
And that's an asset.
And that's the dialect also. So Tirundoram and Thiruvananthapuram and Trivandrum. Actually the freedom to say all three of them is what I would rather say. Now let's move on a little bit from these heavy topics. And
We had lots of heavy topics. We had lots of heavy topics.
We had a lot of heavy topics. You've mentioned books. What are you reading?
I am, what am I reading now? So I have a book coming out in December. So I'm not really reading much outside of that, because I've got lots of like research, lots of my own.
It's not yet in publishing, post-production?
Oh, it is. No. It'll go in September to press.
Okay.
So I'm really in the final stages. Right now we're recording in August. So I have a few weeks to turn it in. So it's in that last stage. And I've been working on this for a while now. So I haven't really done much reading outside of that so far. At the moment, I'm reading a book by Rohan Montero called, good Lord, Why am I forgetting the title? I was reading it yesterday. This is what happens to me. I forget the titles. I remember the story, but I forget the titles. But look up his name. You will find.
What is the story? Maybe we can.
It's about a yaksha who's been cursed to sort of live on Earth in our time, and a certain adventure he gets into, a bunch of missing girls, all of that. It's a very fun, interestingly written, slightly naughty, mischievous kind of book. Really enjoying it. I read half of it yesterday on a flight, and I've got the other half for my return flight. So I'm reading that at the moment. But outside of flights, I'm only reading work stuff. So I really don't have a book that I can recommend off the cuff like that.
Okay. So what Manu Pillai is now a name. Manu S Pillai is like a huge name now. What about Manu S Pillai out in the world that you would rather not have been out in the world?
I mean what? But there isn't that much about me out in the world, to be honest. I keep my private life extremely private. You look at my Instagram, you'll barely find a picture of my family. I don't post any of those things. I have a different account for private stuff. You'll find more gymming exercise videos than you'll find my family pictures on Instagram. So I've been able to sort of navigate that space pretty well, I think. In terms of what I would roll back, I think maybe when I was younger, in my 20s, in your 20s, you also tend to be that Rakta Talap is there a little bit.
Yes,
you're waiting to sort of get into arguments or like make a punchy point or sound, witty and that, all of that, which is fine most of the time. So there are some things I feel I should have done differently or written differently, or maybe not been that snarky or not that overconfident about certain articles I wrote or certain positions I took. But compared to most people, I think I rolled that back quite early on. So I've not made too many mistakes of that nature. But yeah, those few that I made, I always feel that I should have just, zoomed out a little bit and paused for a second before making that argument or putting that in writing.
The other way around now then. What about Manu Pillai that you would rather have the world know, but it's not out there yet?
I don't know. These are questions I really can't answer because I'm so used to treating my work as the primary thing and me as the secondary thing that when you ask me like, what do I want about myself out there, I have no idea. My books I want out there a lot. I want everybody to read my books, but I don't know what about me I want out there or not. It really, I can't, I don't know how to answer.
But then you are the
questions.
school historian because see, that's
what you see, no?
Yeah,
I
because again, that's
like nerdy person
you will talk yourself as a nerdy person, but that nerdy person has been able to give us an insight or a glimpse into a world that we would have never seen it like that. See, and because of which you are the personality that brought it in.
But that's, again, from your perch, you view me that way, right? I don't view myself that way. I still view myself as doing books that interest me on topics that interest me, and somehow people are liking it. That's essentially what I'm doing. I don't think there's like I'm not trying to cultivate myself as some kind of item or a commodity. For me, it's always the books. Somehow people seem to take an interest in me because I suppose I say things in a certain way or I'm able to explain things in a certain way. But again, that's not actively sort of something I do. That's just
that's the thing. No, you are approachable. You are approachable. You're not certain that teacher with that one very certain like do not approach me. You are easy to talk to. You do not talk in big words where people get intimidated. You are able to break down things for us, and yet where you very nicely said that kind of you become a celebrity. That is how you become a celebrity, which is why you are a celebrity.
Oh God.
Okay, fine. You're a celebrity because of your work, which is true. But then people are always interested in the celebrity as well.
No, I'm just like scandalized to hear of myself referred to as a celebrity. I'm just shocked by that.
Okay, fine. You are a celebrity to a certain section of society.
I don't think I'm a celebrity at all.
Did you not see the queue that was outside at the place where that event happened this morning? Because we did.
But again, those are people who come specifically to listen to me at an event. So naturally, there's going to be a queue.
That's because you are
Celebrity for me is basically what Shah Rukh Khan has. That is celebrity. Anything less than that is not celebrity. Just because 5 people recognize you does not mean that you're a celebrity. Right? In the age of social media, if you make 20 videos that go viral, people will start recognizing you, right? But does that mean you're a celebrity? I don't think so.
That is exactly.
We need better standards of what it means to be a celebrity.
When you say Shah Rukh Khan, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, SRK, I seriously am. There is a SRK and then there is Urfi Javed as well.
I've
Both
heard
of
the
them,
name.
they both are equal amount of celebrity. I'm so sorry, SRK. I did not mean to. It's just that she's the only person that came to my head. Urfi Javed is an influencer who has.
I know the name. I've heard the
yeah,
name.
so she's controversial. She's also a celebrity. But then at the same time, you are also a celebrity. Krish Ashok is also a celebrity. The science, the food scientist is also, they are all celebrities in their own worth. So please do not take it out from our fellow.
I think a little bit of public recognition is sweet and nice, but I would not qualify it as celebrity. Celebrity is, it feels like I don't know, it just doesn't come naturally to me to think in that way. For me, therefore, celebrity means a very different level of public recognition and fandom. I don't think fandom is something that people like me will cultivate, right? Like, we want interested readers. And I wouldn't say that there aren't people who are fond of me and like follow me on social media and things. All that is true. But that's not the primary thing, right? Like, that's a byproduct of something else. Okay, I don't know. I'm tying myself in knots. I have no way of answering this
On that note, I think we will end this conversation here. And thank you so much, Manu, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was a pleasure.
And it's me, Prija Arvind, signing off for India Today, SoSouth.